Hello and welcome. Today we're going to show you how to remove old bushings and install new ones in a Dodge 68 RFE transmission. So this is out of a 3500 HD 2008 model year unit, and it came in where the transmission was making noises at the pump and slipping. And so we're going to overhaul this thing completely, and such a critical part of the rebuild process is the removal of the old bushings and installation of new ones. Now this transmission was rebuilt about 3 years ago or so, and it doesn't look like any of the bushings other than maybe those in the low reverse drum were replaced with new ones. So we got to correct that error here, and this video is going to show you how to do it. So one thing I want to make sure I cover first before we get into it is tooling. Okay, the biggest challenge for most do-it-yourselfers when it comes to transmission building in general, and doing the bushing part of the process in particular, is just the sheer amount of tooling that you need to do it right. So you're going to need three different types of tooling. The first type is going to be your blind hole puller sets. Second type is going to be bushing drivers, and the third is going to be a shop press. It can be like a traditional H-frame style press, or it can be a good size arbor press, but you're going to need something. With that said, these bushings are really nice. They're all Teflon coated on the inner diameter, and they come with all the bushings that you're going to need to completely service this unit. So that's what the bushings look like. I took them out of their plastic wrapping. They don't come loose like this, obviously. And then this is going to be the part number. So what we'll do is go ahead and get a little bit closer to the bench. I will put all of these bushings next to their corresponding components, and then we'll begin. So let's take a look at our instructions. So these two bushings are for the front reaction planet ring gear. Right now, you know as well as I do, this is not a ring gear, this is actually a sun gear and a hub. But the part number for the bushing 37999TG, let's get that to focus, is what we see called for in this part, and there's two of them. Okay, it can't be anything else, has to be these, but if you're running this kit, just be aware that identification part that they're designating here for these bushings is not correct. Alright, so what I like to do is I will pick a collet style puller that is maybe about, I don't know, at most 20% smaller in diameter than the bushing that we need to extract when it's fully collapsed and closed. So that when you open it up, it should grab that bushing perfect without actually getting stuck in the bore there. So run it down as far as it'll go, and then check it. Alright, as you can see, it's grabbing the underside of that bushing completely, but it still has freedom of movement in the bore. You don't want it bound up, because then what'll happen is it'll start gouging that bore. Now, this thing's pretty roughed up inside as it is, and I think that's a product of both myself and the previous rebuilder, and maybe even other builders, whoever has worked on this thing in the past, trying to extract the center support using snap ring pliers to grab up on the inner diameter of the shaft here. So you can clean that up with sandpaper. It's not the end of the world, but the bushings, they're pretty worn out, and so they need to be replaced. So I'm going to grab the little slide hammer that comes with this bushing puller kit and see if it's sufficiently heavy and robust enough if you're able to pull this bushing out. If not, we'll take it over to the press, and I'll show you how to use this puller and the press and some tooling to pull it out that way. So let me go ahead and get that set up, and we'll give it a go. All right, let's check it out. So the bushing's pretty gouged up on the inside, but like I said, that had nothing to do with the extraction here. That was either me and or previous builders trying to yank this thing out while it was still in the case and bring the center support with it, so, or the 2-4 housing with it. So the bushing structurally is fine, and I'm, you know, kind of putting emphasis on this because if you're in a situation where you know, your new bushings are out of spec and you're under the gun, or you just simply cannot get a bushing but you didn't realize it until you had already removed the previous or pre-existing bushing, having these pullers allows you to extract the bushing intact, so that if you had to, you know, like I said, in a kind of an extreme worst case scenario, you can put it back in. So that's something that you really can't do with hammers, chisels, and whatnot. So the other thing that you can do is check pre-existing bushings. So for example, if you were concerned that you were not going to be able to find a replacement bushing, maybe they're out of production, you know, Ford FMX is an example of this, you can actually check your workpiece to see if the bushing is serviceable. Most of these bushings, you want to see 2/1000 clearance in the aggregate. And you can do a quick and hasty check by simply trying to rock the workpiece side to side, just like you were if you were checking a, you know, a pinion gear on one of the planets, and see if there's excessive side play. If there is no side play, or it's, you know, very imperceivable, and the workpiece still spins nice and smooth, then you can go ahead and reuse that bushing. A lot of times you'll buy parts from Transtar that are good used that have bushings in them, and what they did at Transtar, or, you know, from the reman factory, is simply lightly sanded the bushings, and then they would check them, at least in theory. But again, these are all worst case scenarios if you had to reuse the bushings, you know, because you were in a jam. Otherwise, you just go and reinstall them. So let's go ahead and yank that other one out, and then we'll go to the press and install the new ones. And last thing I'll mention too is you want to make note of the depth of where the bushing is relative to the workpiece. So here you can see the pattern. The other thing you want to be mindful of is any lube holes. Okay, if the piece has any lubrication holes, like for example the low reverse drum, note this bushing here seems to be interfering with this lube hole. I don't know if, you know, this is actual, you know, would constitute interference to the extent that this will be incorrect, but it certainly does look like it's partially covering that, you know, that part of the clutch circuit there, that orifice. So this has a nice big wide hole, so when we put that in, hopefully that remediates that issue. Alright, so here we have a case where the bushing is just simply too stubborn, it's in there too tight, and the slide hammer is simply not heavy enough to yank it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the press, and we're going to take the collet itself with us so that we can remove this thing using the shop press in combination with this collet. Alright, I think I have everything set up the way I need it, so we're going to use a combination of press tooling and that collet to get rid of this other bushing. So we have the collet expanded to the extent that it's fully engaged on the bushing, but it's also able to move freely in the bore. Okay, if you're going to use this method, you know, collet and press, that becomes absolutely critical, because, you know, once you start pressing on it, I mean, you have anywhere from 12 to 20 or more tons of force, and if that collet is bound up in the bore, it's going to destroy the workpiece, so you don't want that. If you have large bearing splitters, for example, if you're working on a workpiece that's geared, you know, has you know, it's basically a gear like this, then if you don't have machined press plates, then you're going to want to use a bearing splitter. And then the only other thing you need to be mindful of is making sure that your plates allow for, you know, enough space for this bushing to actually come out. every once in a while I'll do this and I get to a point where I just can't go and press it anymore. It's like a hard stop, and I take a look and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm interfering. You know, I don't have enough space for the bushing to fall, you know, through the press. So it looks like we have to push this way a little bit. All right, just double checking to see if I still have enough space. I do. All right, once you make contact, just double check everything else. Make sure that you still have the gap you need to allow the bushing to fall through, as well as make sure you're sturdy here, you know, straight up and down as much as you can. All right, I'm almost out. I'm going to allow the collet and the bushing to fall down to the floor. I don't want this falling on the workpiece, so I'm going to prioritize holding these two things while the bushing fell down. So there's our old bushing. So I'm going to leave this here and grab the other new bushings, and we're going to install them one at a time. So we're going to install the first one, then we'll check it on the hub, then we'll install the second one and do the same thing. All right, let's go ahead and prepare to install our first bushing. So it's going to be this one right here, and if we recall from when we had taken it out, and you can actually see it too in terms of a witness mark pattern where the bushing was installed into what depth. Okay, so you can see it. So we're going to follow that same line. So I'm using a driver that barely fits. It fits. I mean, it's solid on there, but it's not 100% perfect. So if you're in that situation and you're kind of almost in between drivers, I recommend you get a driver that's going to be a little bit bigger than the bushing so that you can seat it to flush, and then finish it off with the driver that is designed to seat it below flush where it's not perfectly sized to that bushing. And the reason you want to have it not so gigantic, like for example something like this, is so that you can keep watch of the bushing and have much better visibility as you're pressing it into the workpiece. So get it as square as you can, and then from there just drop the ram on it and then seat it home until it's flush, and then swap to your other driver to finish it off. All right, now we've seated it flush, so we're going to check and see how it is, make sure it's not cocked sideways or something. Because remember, we still have to seat it about 1/8 or so of an inch below flush. Not looking too bad. All right, let's check it. So this is the forward facing side. So this is the front bushing, and then this is our journal. It fits like a glove. I mean, basically it has no side play, even with the other bushing not in there. So just be real careful when you take it out. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and we'll do the back side. This is solid steel, so you're not going to have an issue with pressing on it. If it was not, then what you would want to do is find something that, you know, like a, I don't know, a pipe or, you know, a cylindrical piece of steel that will fit in here but not interfere with those notches. I mean, I know I'm making that comment specific to this thing, but the principle applies no matter, you know, what you're pressing on. Alright, appears to be as it should, so let's go ahead and finish it off. Alright, that looks about right. Again, a glove-like fit. Alright, you're gonna want to take some 400 grit sandpaper and then just go over it evenly. Alright, now we got a sheet of 1500. I cut this in half, but you can kind of see it's not 500, it's 1500. Alright, frankly, I should have done that prior to test fitment, but it is what it is. There we go. That's the fit you want to see. It was hanging up just a hair. I wasn't comfortable with it, so. All right, next bushing I want to work on is going to be the bushing for the input clutch hub. And I want to do that because this is really the only bushing that we're going to use like a chisel or bushing cutter and a hammer to remove it. So anytime you have a situation where you need to use chisels or bushing cutters or whatever, whenever possible, always look for the parting line in the bushing, because that's where you want to attack. You want to just basically collapse this inward and it'll bow in, and then you can sometimes just literally grab it right up out of the workpiece. So here's our stator. We're not going to reuse this stator. We have a reman pump that we're going to be installing in this transmission, but you want to take all your sealing rings off, and then we can use this stator to test fit the bushing so that we can validate that it's good to go. I mean, if you have your reman pump on hand, then that's what you want to do, but I'll use both actually, because I do have it. I just have to take it out of the box. But right now I'm just pulling off the sealing rings so that I can at least use this as an initial test and then validate with that other pump once I pull it out of the packaging. All right, the hub's chucked up in the device. It's got aluminum soft jaws, which you can't see, and then this towel. So I will use precautions whenever putting any transmission parts and vices where I know I'm going to hammer on them. The other thing I like to use is ear pro, so eye and ears. And then, like I mentioned, you want to go ahead and attack the crack, the parting line right there in the bushing. So I'm going to start with the bushing cutter. I like these tools because they're rounded and there's less risk of you actually harming the workpiece. So we'll see how it goes. I'm going to come in behind it like this because you have a little bit of a gap here that you can exploit. So just go on one side and smack it forward. So do a check. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Again, you don't need anything more than sandpaper. This, to be clear, is not the end of the world. Now, if you had like, big gouges or anything kind of pushing into the bore, then you will have to knock that down. Maybe a angle grinder with a wafer pad or something along those lines. Don't get me wrong, this was not the prettiest of extractions, but again, don't also get hung up on stuff like that because it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to be using a 6L80 bearing assembly driver. This is for the needle bearing deal that goes into the rear plan in those transmissions. So it's going to be pressed into service in an effort to install this bushing, pun intended. Okay, so it's just a hair bigger than the bushing itself. And what has to happen here is we need to be 100% square, or as damn close to 100% as possible, because there's minimal margin for error with these thin little bushings. So little meaning the height. They just they like to cock sideways. So let's go ahead and give it a go. Alright, it started off slightly cockeyed, but I think it squared up when it seated all the way down. So let's take a look. See what we got. Alright, let's go to the bench. The lighting here sucks. Alright, moment of truth. No sealing rings. All right, that fits like a glove. So it's flush with the surface, so that bushing driver works perfect for this.